He stopped at a shabby roadside cafe for coffee. He didn't expect a 6-year-old waitress, or to meet the daughter he never knew existed. Stephen Marlowe had driven this stretch of road countless times in his youth, back when it was just the quickest way to leave his small hometown behind. Now, all these years later, the same cracked asphalt and whispering cornfields looked different, not because the road had changed, but because he had. At 37, he was a CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech firms in the country, with offices in 3 cities, meetings that ran into the night, and a calendar booked months in advance. But on that particular afternoon, something in him had cracked, quietly and without warning, during a conference call he couldn't even remember the purpose of. He had ended the meeting mid-sentence, gotten into his car, and just driven. No GPS. No destination. Just the need to be away from all of it. He had been on the road for nearly 4 hours when hunger and fatigue finally caught up to him. He passed a cluster of aging gas stations and closed thrift stores before spotting a tiny roadside cafe. It was the kind of place he would normally ignore, a faded building with chipped red paint, a crooked sign hanging by one chain, and windows fogged from the inside. The parking lot was almost empty, and there was no one outside. He hesitated, foot hovering over the gas pedal, but then he turned in anyway. Something, he couldn't say what, pulled him in. The inside was still. Too still. There was no soft background music, no chime above the door. No hum of conversation or clinking of plates. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, casting warm lines across the empty tables. The air smelled like coffee, butter, and something faintly sweet, muffins, maybe. No one greeted him, but the place didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like a movie waiting to resume. He walked slowly to a table near the window and sat down, loosening his tie slightly, grateful for the silence. His body was buzzing with exhaustion, but it was the kind of tiredness that came not from lack of sleep, but from too many months of pretending he wasn't running on empty. He closed his eyes for what felt like a breath. When he opened them again, she was standing there. A little girl, no older than 6, with long chestnut hair pulled into a low ponytail and a red apron tied awkwardly around her waist over a plain white t-shirt. She held a small notepad and a pen in both hands, her brown eyes wide but not nervous. There was something oddly professional in the way she looked at him. "What would you like to order, sir?" she asked, her voice light and clear. Stephen blinked, completely thrown off. For a second, he thought maybe it was a game, that her parents were nearby. He glanced around, half expecting to see a smiling mother waving from behind the counter. But there was no one. "Wait, are you alone here?" "Where's the staff?" he asked, sitting up straighter. "My mom's in the kitchen," the girl replied without hesitation. "I help her. We don't have enough money to hire anyone else. So she cooks, and I bring food to the tables." There was no self-pity in her tone. She said it the way other kids say they help feed the dog or take out the trash. It was just life for her, normal. Stephen looked at her closely. Something about her, her posture, the curve of her mouth, the shape of her eyes, felt strange. Familiar. Like a face he had seen long ago, faded in memory, but not forgotten. "Could you ask your mom to come out for a moment?" he said gently. The girl nodded and disappeared behind the swinging kitchen door. He waited, heart beginning to beat faster for reasons he couldn't name. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the girl's face that had stirred something too deep. But nothing prepared him for what came next. The door swung open again, and a woman stepped out. At first, he didn't breathe. She was wearing a kitchen apron dusted in flour, her hair tied up in a loose knot, a towel slung over one shoulder. Her movements were tired but graceful. And then she looked up. "Stephen?" Her voice cracked on his name. He stood slowly. "Anna?" It had been 6.5 years. He hadn't seen her since the day he boarded a plane to Seattle, leaving behind their small apartment, their shared dreams, and the life they had started to build together. Back then, he told himself it was necessary, he had to make something of himself. She deserved more than what he could give at the time. But he never looked back. Never called. Never wrote. Now she was standing 10 feet away, flower on her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. And the little girl who had taken his order just moments before? She was hers. No, she was theirs. Anna didn't speak right away. Her breath caught in her throat as if even the sound of his name had stirred something painful, something long buried beneath years of survival and silence. Stephen stood frozen near the table, his fingers resting on the back of the wooden chair, but his mind was racing. The quiet hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the distant bubbling from the kitchen were the only sounds filling the strange stillness between them. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find her here, hadn't expected to see her at all, not now, not ever. She looked older, not in a way that made her seem worn out or less beautiful, but in a way that told him life had demanded more of her than it should have. Anna finally moved, her eyes blinking hard as if waking from a vivid dream. She stepped toward him, slowly, carefully, almost like she wasn't sure if he was real. When she reached the edge of the table, she let out a breath she'd been holding and folded her arms across her chest, not defensively, but as if holding herself together. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly, her voice more steady than he expected. Stephen cleared his throat. "I was driving. I didn't even know where I was going. I just saw the cafe and stopped." He could see the storm behind her eyes, questions crashing into one another, restraint holding them back. She didn't say anything for a moment, just nodded slowly, then glanced toward the kitchen door where the little girl had vanished. When she turned back to him, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You met Jamie." His heart dropped. The name landed with a weight he couldn't explain. Jamie. The little girl with chestnut hair, a red apron, and steady brown eyes. His mind immediately tried to do the math, but his chest already knew the answer before the years could be counted. He hesitated. "She's mine?" Anna looked at him then, not with anger, but with something far heavier, sadness. She nodded. "I found out I was pregnant just after you left. I tried to reach out once. You'd already changed your number. I was scared. And then I thought, maybe you were better off not knowing." Stephen felt like the floor beneath him was shifting. He sat down slowly, not trusting his legs to keep him upright. His hands trembled slightly on the edge of the table. "I would have come back," he said. "If I'd known." "God, Anna, why didn't you try again?" "Right, anything." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, her expression tired but honest. "Because I didn't want to ask you for something you didn't choose. You were building your empire, your future. I wasn't going to be the one to derail it. I thought maybe I could do this on my own. And I have." Stephen swallowed hard. "You shouldn't have had to." Anna's mouth twisted into a small, sad smile. "Maybe. But it happened. And she's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Even when I had nothing, I had her. And that was enough." They sat in silence for a few moments. He looked around the cafe, the worn tables, the mismatched chairs, the faded menus written in chalk on an old board. It was humble. But it was real. It was clearly something Anna had built with her own hands, day by day, likely out of necessity rather than passion. And now, he saw the weight of those years in her face. "Does she know?" he asked, finally. Anna shook her head. "Only that her dad was someone I used to love, but that he had to leave. I never lied. I just didn't give her a face to miss." Stephen stared at the table, his jaw tight. There was so much he wanted to say, apologies, regrets, pleas. But none of it felt like it would be enough. Nothing could rewrite the 6.5 years he had missed. Suddenly, Jamie reappeared through the kitchen door, carefully balancing a glass of water on a tray. She walked over with the kind of cautious precision that made Stephen ache. No child should be working like that, taking on roles bigger than their age. But when she placed the glass in front of him and gave a proud little nod, he smiled, even as emotion gripped his chest. "Did I do it right?" she asked, looking at her mom. "You did great, sweetheart," Anna said gently. Jamie turned back to Stephen. "Are you gonna stay for lunch?" He looked into her eyes and felt something deep inside him shift, settle, and wake all at once. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I think I will." And in that moment, though none of them quite understood what it meant yet, something had begun to change. Not fixed. Not forgiven. But opened. A door, once locked, now quietly ajar. The afternoon sun had shifted by the time Stephen finished his lunch, casting a softer golden hue through the cafe windows. The food was simple, vegetable soup with homemade bread and a slice of warm apple pie, but he could barely taste any of it. His thoughts were tangled, running in circles between the reality of the present and the weight of the years he had missed. Across the table, Jamie chatted between bites, unaware of the storm building inside the man she had only just met. Her voice was light, full of the kind of innocence that came from not yet knowing the world could break you. She asked him questions like, "Do you have a dog?" and "What's your favorite ice cream?" with a natural ease that made him want to cry and laugh at the same time. He answered every one of them, his voice steady even as his heart ached. Anna stayed mostly in the kitchen, checking in occasionally but giving them space. He could feel her watching from a distance, her movements careful, protective. She wasn't sure yet what he wanted, and truthfully, neither was he. But one thing had become crystal clear: Jamie was his daughter. There was no room for denial. She had his eyes, his chin, even the same awkward left-handed grip on her spoon. More than that, there was something in the way she watched people, a quiet observation before she spoke, that felt eerily familiar. He recognized himself in her in a way that couldn't be explained away by coincidence. After Jamie finished her pie, she excused herself and skipped off toward a small corner of the cafe where she had set up a coloring station, crayons, papers, and a few worn storybooks. Stephen watched her for a while, her small frame hunched over the table, deeply focused. The sight of her, so content, so unaware of the emotional earthquake he was experiencing, nearly undid him. He turned toward Anna as she approached with a cup of coffee for herself and sat down again across from him. He looked at her, really looked, and saw exhaustion in her eyes, not just from the day, but from years of doing everything alone. "How have you managed all this?" he asked quietly. Anna shrugged and wrapped her hands around the mug. "One day at a time. I had savings at first. Then I worked nights. Then I borrowed to buy this place. It's not much, but it's ours. Jamie loves it here. She thinks owning a cafe is the coolest thing in the world." Her lips curled into a tired smile. "You did all this alone," he said, more to himself than to her. "I had no choice," she replied, gently but firmly. "I couldn't chase you down. I couldn't raise her and chase your ghost at the same time. I had to choose her. I chose her." Stephen nodded slowly. He couldn't argue with any of it. She had done what he hadn't, stayed, fought, grown up. And now he was the stranger in his own story, trying to step back into a chapter he had abandoned without reading it through. "I want to be part of her life," he said finally. The words came out like a confession, heavy and honest. "I don't know how to fix what I broke, but I can't walk away from her. Not now." Anna's expression didn't change right away. She stared at him over the rim of her coffee cup, as if trying to see through him to the man beneath the polished suit and practiced charm. "She doesn't know disappointment yet," she said softly. "Not really. I've protected her from it. If you say you'll be in her life, you better mean it. Because if you leave again, it won't be me who pays the price. It'll be her. I won't, he said, without hesitation. I can't. There was a long pause between them. Not tense, just full of questions, history, and things left unsaid. Outside, a breeze rustled the trees lining the road. Inside, Jamie sang quietly to herself as she colored, the tip of her tongue poking out in concentration. Anna finally set her mug down and leaned back in her chair. Then you need to come back. Not just today. If you want to know her, it has to be slow. Consistent. Earned. Stephen nodded. I will. I want to. Good, she said. Because she already likes you. And if she starts to love you, she didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. He looked down at his hands, then at his daughter, and something